everybody, and welcome to the next episode of New England Sports Weekly. And I'm glad that you've decided to join me this evening for another live broadcast if you're here on YouTube or if you're listening on the Spotify app or through SoundCloud. And hopefully, we'll get iTunes straightened out here. Some things going on there longer than it's expected. So, we'll try to get that up and running as soon as possible, but I'm glad that you've all decided to join me this evening. It was a pretty interesting week here since we last talked in the Boston sports scene. Not really much to talk about. Of course, kidding there, because it's just been Woj bomb after playoff game after you name it. It's pretty much showing up here this week here for the Boston sports fan. You've got everything from Danny Ainge retiring to the Red Sox blowing a couple games, really laying some stinkers down in Houston. Of course, the Bruins marching through the playoffs and now playing the Islanders. We'll get into all of that here, but I'm just glad that you're all doing well, and I'm glad if you all had a good Memorial Day weekend, even though it was pretty crappy out there if you're listening and you're in New England, which I know a lot of the fans that listen are. So glad if you're able to get out, maybe do a few things here and there. I know you weren't able to go out work in your gardens or go out and have a barbecue, at least if you don't have a massive tent or awning you can do. We were pretty much kind of inside all weekend. Wasn't really what I wanted to do. Now that I got the new house and have a nice yard that I can go out and enjoy, but made the best of it this weekend. Now, one team that didn't really make the best of it were the Celtics, as we get right out of the box to start the broadcast, as they dropped game 5 of the series to finally they're going on vacation, and it was pretty much a mercy kill for the Celtics. It just was not going well at all in this playoff series. To be honest, I was surprised that they even stole a game against the Nets, but they were able to come up strong on that Friday night in the Garden, even after Kyrie made all his comments. So they came out, played pretty well, stunned the crowd, but then reality came right back on the Celtics, and they got absolutely stomped in the last two games, in game 4, in game 5. So really wasn't a surprise to see that happen to the Celtics. But the biggest surprise came off the court at about 10:15 this morning, when the Celtics announced that Danny Ainge is retiring from his position as the president of basketball operations. But probably the even bigger surprise was that Brad Stevens is now taking over the job as president of basketball operations, and he will leave his job as the head coach. So that was a shocker there. Not really that Ainge retired, because there were a few rumblings here or there with his health situation after he had his heart problems a couple of years ago, back in, I believe it was 2018, 2019, that he had those the health scare, and his children were kind of urging him to retire. So that was really not as big of a shock. It was still a surprise. I wasn't expecting that after the comments that Danny made a couple days ago about everybody coming back, including himself and Brad Stevens, and everybody trying to make that another run here to be competitive and see if they could push this even farther with the Celtics. But it was more the shock that Brad Stevens is now basically the GM, because for lack of a better term there, the position of general manager has kind of gone by the wayside in professional sports, as far as not that it doesn't exist. I shouldn't say that it doesn't exist anymore. It's just a matter that if you look probably in the last 5-7 years or so, a lot of the actual trades, the moving and shaking that goes on in a front office in most sports, really the only exception would probably be some football coaches in the NFL. That's really where the power structure is still kind of the same. Kind of still the general manager, then you kind of go up. But anyways, my whole point is that there really aren't any true GMs anymore. The GMs are basically the puppet position for the president of operations of basketball, baseball, hockey, and for even, like I said, football, there's probably a 50-50 split. Of course, here in New England, it's kind of a way of a different story with Belichick being the coach and the GM. But basically, it's something nowadays where if you're the president of basketball operations, you're the GM on top of having to run some other day-to-day operations with the club. So it's really, he's becoming the general manager at this point for Brad Stevens. So that was the big shock during that press conference. Because I when I first heard the news that Danny Ainge was retiring, I was like, oh boy, I wonder what's going to happen to Brad. Well, he wasn't on the hot seat because he is now the person in charge that would make that decision of hiring his replacement. So he doesn't have to worry about that at all. And now he reports directly to the Steve Pagliuca and Wick Grossback. So that was the big shock of today. That was unexpected. When I wrote this rundown last night, and of course you always know that sports changes on a day-to-day basis, but still, this was not something that I was planning on putting on the show today at all. But it went from being an afterthought to being one of the main talking points that we'll get into deeper here in the next segment when we talk about the Celtics and Brad Stevens and where everything goes from here. But sticking with the out-of-the-box segment here, the Bruins played 2 playoff games in the second round versus the Islanders. Game 1 was pretty much a rout. It ended up being, after an empty net goal by Taylor Hall, a 5-2 win on home ice for the Bruins. Game 2 was a little bit of a different story, and we'll break that game down as we get later on into the show, but it was a tale of the Bruins not showing up in that second period and getting massively outplayed and taking a few stupid penalties where the refs might not have given them some help on a couple of those calls, but you got to go with the hand that you're dealt. And they lost that hand in that second period. They did make a good comeback, but they ended up eventually losing in overtime 4-3 to the Islanders. So that series is knotted up at 1 apiece as they head to Nassau County Coliseum on Long Island. They'll play tomorrow night is game 3 of that series at 7:30. So we'll be all jacked and pumped for that. So bought my throwback David Pasternak shirt, if you can see that on camera. It's got the late 1970s through the 80s and early 90s Boston block spoke to be that they brought that back this year for the Lake Tahoe game out in California. And actually those jerseys were pretty nice. I do say I like that as one of their better alternative jerseys as a side note, and with the as they call it, the crack bear on the shoulder pads. If I had my banner that I should have left up here in the room, switched everything around a little bit. But as you can see, it's the Red Sox pennant and the championship one for the Patriots. So those are hanging up here. I'll have to bring that in next week. But if I had that one up, you could definitely see what people call the quote unquote crack bear, the one that looks really menacing. Nothing like the new one today, a little more cartoonish. But bought this, got all excited for the playoff series. I've been meaning to buy a pasta shirt for a long time, so it's a long time overdue. Decided between that and the jersey. So maybe once we get deeper into the playoffs, maybe I'll make that decision to purchase it. But the the playoffs have been really exciting so far. Despite the Bruins losing in overtime, this playoff run is night and day what we saw with the Celtics. You went from one series where it was lethargic and you knew you weren't going to have much of a shot to playoff hockey where it's the wild, wild west, really. It's so fun. It's so exciting. It's nice to be on the edge of your seat. Now, obviously, you wish the Bruins would have been able to pull that one out, but that's how that puck will roll on the ice or slide on the ice, if you will. And then lastly, the Boston Red Sox, since we last talked, had a series against the Florida Marlins where they were rained out in the finale on Sunday. So they have a quasi sweep, if you will, taking both of the games that were played at Fenway in that absolute torrential downpour on Friday night and another crappy day on Saturday. And Sunday was a washout, as you can tell. And then they've started a series down in Houston on Tuesday, and they dropped the first two games of this 4-game set against the Astros. So the Red Sox have been a little up and down lately. They're still right in the thick of the division. They're still one of the top 5 teams in baseball, but unfortunately for them, they have probably 2 of the top 10 teams in baseball that are also in that division. So you have three top 10 teams, including the Red Sox, in that AL East. So it's not exactly a nice, comfy cushion that they built for themselves. Not any fault of their own, but really that they have the luck of the draw playing in the AL East. So things still looking pretty good for the Red Sox. We'll touch on some of their struggles with the rotation as we get later on into the show, but so far still so good. So everything's been going pretty well for the Bruins, for the Red Sox and the Bruins, for that matter. But then, as we mentioned earlier today, as we'll dive right into the Celtics without further ado here. As we mentioned off the top of the show, Danny Ainge at about 10 o'clock, somewhere in that 10 to 10:15 area this morning, announced his official retirement. There was some buzz a little earlier this morning, but there wasn't any official note. And then the Celtics, right out on their social media, decided that but they put out a tweet and an Instagram post saying that they were going to have a live press conference around 10 o'clock. And sure enough, Danny Ainge did confirm those suspicions that he was going to retire, made those true. And that wasn't the biggest shock, as I mentioned earlier. It was Brad Stevens, who also was at the press conference. So talked about it earlier. Brad Stevens, after I heard that news, before everything became official, when you heard the Woj bomb, and for those of you that aren't familiar with Woj bombs, that is Adrian Wojnarowski with ESPN. He's one of the top insiders for the NBA. So, and he's made a pretty good career. He's basically, I would call him the Adam Schefter of the NFL. Either him or Shams Charania would be in that category. So basically, he'll break the big stories. And he certainly did this morning, at least if you're a Celtics fan. Because, like I said, I was all riled up to talk about the whole situation with Kyrie, how that incident with the bottle getting thrown at him, all of that, all jacked up off of last week's show after we tore Kyrie down. Still had a lot of energy. And we'll touch on a little bit about that here in a moment as we get deeper into the segment. But really, stealing the show here was Danny Ainge. Really, that was Danny Ainge and Brad Stevens. So when I heard the tweet, when I heard the news from Adrian Wojnarowski, the Woj bomb, that not Brad Stevens, but that Danny Ainge was going to retire, was thinking about retiring before it became official, my first thoughts were, okay, what's going to happen to Brad Stevens? I'm not the biggest Brad fan. I like him. He's been a good coach. He's been one of those type of coaches that can develop young talent. He'll help you climb that ladder, but he's not going to give you that big push to get you right over to the top. There's just something that's missing with Stevens when it comes to that part of his coaching. I would call him a good NBA coach. He's not a great NBA coach. I know for a while a lot of people wanted to put him in that Popovich class, and that was really not that's a green teamer move right there. And I don't fall into that green teamer mode right there. So I would not have put him in that category. Now, that being said, I liked him as a coach, but as I just said, I just don't see him being one of those coaches that puts you well over the top, that's going to get you to the NBA finals, that's going to help you win an NBA finals. I don't see that. So my first thought was, what's going to happen here? Is he going to stick around? Because with Danny Ainge there, it seemed like Brad Stevens was ticketed to be the coach for a long term because he signed that long-term extension. Now there's no official length of the contract or what the salary was, but a lot of the speculation was that it was a 5-year deal with the Celtics. Now that you got the news this morning that Danny Ainge is stepping down and that Brad Stevens is going to take over as the president of basketball operations for the Boston Celtics immediately, and he will not be coaching. So he's not going to pull a Belichick and be the coach / general manager at the same time. And Steve Pagliuca or Whit Grossback, one of the two, this morning in a press conference, both of those, by the way, if you're not sure, are the owners of the Boston Celtics, the co-owners. They came to the podium, and when they were asked that question, if they might consider him being the coach / GM in a Belichick role, they equivocally said no, that whoever they're going to bring in, they wanted to keep that separate, which I like, because not everybody is going to be suited for that role. It really takes a special person. It really takes somebody like a Bill Belichick to do that, or in the past, a Red Auerbach, who it kind of overlapped there because he didn't have too many years as coach / GM, but he kind of was behind the scenes. And then he went to the front office full time. But so it's something that it certainly has happened across the years. And I'm not going to sit here and list off all the list of coach and GM combos. But my point is that it takes a special kind of coach to become the general manager, because there's a lot of stress there. There's a lot of decision making that has to happen on a daily basis between coaching and then also having to make those roster decisions. Now, basketball, you're only dealing with that smaller roster there, so you're not having to worry about like football, a 53-man like Belichick is, or if you're doing it baseball, 25, or now it's 26-man roster, or even in hockey where you're dealing with the 4 lines, your goalies. So you're dealing with 22 players on a roster. So it's basketball. It's still smaller, but still there's a lot of moving parts in there. And I just wouldn't trust Brad to, not because I don't think not that he's not qualified, but just there's a lot that you have to do, and he's brand new at this job. So it's going to be tough for him as far as being new at the general manager's role, I should say. Now, what I still don't think this was the complete right move for the Celtics. I was in favor of cleaning house when it comes to the front office and getting some new blood in there, because I think this is one of those times where things have run their course with this organization. We've seen it in the past. It happened to the Red Sox back in 2011. Now, Terry Francona is arguably the best Red Sox manager of all time. He got 2 World Series titles. He was there in the heart of 2004 in that season. Obviously, before they won the World Series that fall, the expectations were sky high because they just went to the ALCS in 2003. And the list goes on and on with all the pressure that he had to deal with. That was probably, at the time, in that time period in Boston was probably the biggest pressure cooker of managerial jobs. Because even though as big as football is in America, and back in 2003, 2004, I remember that being 13, 14 years old at the time, even just kind of understanding that aspect of it, just how big of a pressure cooker the Red Sox managerial job was. Because you make one bad move, you could have 50 of them that went well for you in the past couple of weeks, but you make that one bad move, especially in that time period right before the Red Sox won that fall. It was just, you were going to have your head taken off if you make one bad mistake. So as far as that situation went, that's kind of the point that I'm making when it comes to Danny Ainge and the Celtics organization. Things had run their course, because Danny Ainge, he brought this team a title back in 2008. He got them to another NBA Finals in 2010. They almost won that series. So it really, really was a great run there for Danny. We all remember the trade that he made with the Brooklyn Nets back in 2013 when he traded an aging Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett. And then he got back Jason Terry, and he got back some decent players, but that wasn't what it was all about. They got those picks from the Nets that ended up being Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, who are foundational pieces. We'll get to them here in a second as well, about what their future is going to hold for the Celtics. But that was his second act, if you will, after bringing a title in 2008, and just being able to do that for the Celtics after they went through, at the time back in 2007, that was 22 years since they last won a title. And I know some fan bases will roll their eyes and, oh, great, you're talking about titles now, blah, 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 blah. But the Celtics were the original dynasty, the original, they were what the Patriots were for the last 20 years. And basketball is going to be a little bit more different. They ended up winning 16 titles from basically the inception of the NBA until 1986. And then just things fell right off the face of the earth. And we're not going to get into that whole history lesson because we got a lot to touch on today. But basically, my point being that Danny came in, restored the Celtic legacy, restored everything back to what a lot of Celtics fans had expected for pretty much their whole lives. For the older Celtics fans, those younger ones, such as myself, born in 91, don't obviously remember any of that. I remember it was Paul Pierce and Antoine Walker with the Walker wiggle in those some bad Celtics teams, and then a few Celtics teams that won in 2002 that went to the NBA, not the NBA, but the Eastern Conference Finals that lost to the Nets. So it's just been, it was a long road to get where they were in 2008. So we got to give Danny credit there. And then bringing Jason Tatum and Brown to the Celtics, that if they end up staying with this team, if they don't end up going the modern NBA route and asking for trades to go play with their buddies, or unless they do it here, then if they end up staying there, Danny Ainge did one hell of a job to rebuild that Celtics organization. Now, the last 2 years have been a little bit different. They ended up going to three Eastern Conference Finals in the last 4 years before this year. So everything was looking pretty good. But like I mentioned earlier with Brad, the getting to that over the hill, getting over that hump to try to get to the NBA Finals, let alone win it. So it's just been a struggle the last couple of years. It just seems like they've been stuck in neutral this whole time. There hasn't been that one moment where you're like, okay, they're going to break through. They're going to break through. It just seems like every time they get to the Eastern Conference Finals, they run into that wall. They're not able to find it. And to me, it's the roster around Tatum and Brown that hasn't been, since Kyrie left, hasn't been the same, because everything broke down when it came to Gordon Hayward. He ended up wanting out after his role kind of got muddied here. So it hasn't been the smoothest of sailing since about 2018, since that season got over and Kyrie bagged out of town. So it's been, as I mentioned earlier, it was a good job by Ainge as far as what he was able to do to get us to that point. He had a hell of a run as the GM, but just things have stalled. And this is one of those moments like where I was talking about with the Red Sox in 2011, where Terry Francona pretty much gave everything he had to this franchise. And they ended up losing with that loaded team in 2011 with the whole chicken and beer situation. And Francona got dragged through the mud, which pissed me off, just the way it happened. All right. There we go, folks. Okay, we're back in business here. So I apologize for that. Something happened with the microphone where everything got disconnected. So I do apologize about that. Where I'm not not entirely sure what ended up happening there, but we'll we'll march on here. So, but anyways, as I was talking about with the Boston Celtics and Danny Ainge, I think it was about time for things to change for the Celtics, where they needed some new blood. Now I don't like the route that they went, because I thought Brad Stevens probably had to go with him as well, because I think he's basically, to the Celtics, he is Doug Collins. And for those of you who don't remember Doug Collins, he was the coach with the Chicago Bulls in the late 80s, the beginning of the 90s, before Phil Jackson came. And he reminds me of Brad Stevens from the standpoint that he got a lot out of Michael as far as a scorer, in Scottie Pippen, in that team was a good team. They just were never able to get past those 80s Celtics and the 80s Pistons. And then obviously they didn't have to worry about getting past the Lakers, but still that whole 80s scene of basketball was full of great teams, and you had the greatest player of all time before the 90s rolled around, and they had those 6 championships with those three-peats that they had in the 90s. But before that situation, though, because that's what MJ is remembered for. But nobody, until The Last Dance came out, nobody remembers that period, probably in that late 80s, where MJ was making the playoffs, but just not making it far. Because everybody remembers his rookie season. Everybody remembers 86, where he put up 63, a playoff record against the Celtics and Larry Bird. But once you got to the late 80s, the 87, 88, 89, where they just were hitting their heads against the wall, they needed a coaching change. And Michael didn't like it. And it's a little bit different for Tatum and Brown. We're not sure how they feel about Brad Stevens going yet, because they haven't spoken publicly about it. But still, it kind of reminds me of that situation where you need somebody to push you over the top. You need somebody that has some fresh ideas that come in and really kick you basically in the ass there and get you to where you need to go. So I just don't see Brad fitting with what they need to go or what they need to do going forward. And again, obviously he doesn't have experience as a GM, so that's another mark against him. So Brad as a person and Brad as a coach, if you're building a young team and you kind of need somebody to kickstart your organization, I like Brad. But where this team needs to go going forward, I wanted him and Ainge gone to kind of clean house and see what you could do with that. But now that you move Brad into the situation, is Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, if something goes wrong with whoever the new coach is, are they going to go running to Brad and complain to him, or this needs to go back to the way that you did it, or depending on how things go, it could be a Jerry Krause situation for all we know. And as if you remember from seeing the Last Dance documentary with Jerry Krause, he was the GM of the Bulls from the 80s through the 90s. And that team hated him. Specifically, Michael Jordan hated his general manager. And of course, things went along, Scottie Pippen, and that whole team pretty much developed some bad feelings against their general manager. Is it going to go that way? I just don't see a middle ground here. There could be, and there needs to be some good middle ground, but I don't see where that's going to come from at this standpoint, just because he's been so long their head coach, now moving up to the general manager, just literally the day after they lost a playoff series where they need more turnover. I don't see how this is going to go well for Brad. I don't know how long he's going to last. I don't think it's going to be a long haul thing for Brad, even though obviously they say all the right things in the press conference. They try to make it seem like Brad's going to be their general manager for long-term, president of basketball operations long-term. But I thought they probably should have looked outside the house. Now where they go to replace Brad, there's been rumors that Sam Cassell, who played for the Celtics in their championship year in 2008, a longtime Clipper, he's rumored to be one of the higher ranking choices, as the odds makers have it. I believe he's the number one choice. Then you have Jason Kidd, who I'm not really a fan of his coaching. His first stint didn't go really well. I know obviously if we did that to Belichick, he wouldn't be the Patriots head coach and wouldn't be the greatest coach of all time. He'd still be out on the street doing whatever. But there's just something about Jason Kidd's coaching style that I'm not a big fan of. And then another one out there is Chauncey Billups. And then you have the Celtics bench coach. Excuse me. He is also rumored to be in the hunt for the coaching job. So those are the early candidates. Now, obviously, there's probably going to be some dark horse candidates there. And also Carol Lawson, who's on the Celtics staff, is in rumors to be the head coach as well. So things will start to shape out here. I call in the water boy there and needed a break. But no, as things start to shape up here for the Celtics, we'll keep you informed. We'll let you know what's going on. Now, quickly, what I'll touch on here now that we took up a lot of the show talking about Danny Ainge and excuse me, folks, still getting over that cold there. And Danny Ainge and the Celtics. We'll talk a little bit about the Kyrie situation. Of course, if you watch that game, on Friday night, you probably saw Kyrie get stomped by the Celtics. So what does he come out and do the next day? On Sunday, excuse me, he comes out, plays really well, stomps the Celtics at home. Then what does he do? He goes and stomps on Lucky, the Celtics mascot, on the one painted on the floor. I shouldn't say because they have a actual guy. The logo on the floor. He ended up stomping on Lucky on the logo. Now, I'm not going to make a gigantic deal about it. Now, yeah, it was a little bit disrespectful just because it's like, get off the court. You won, whatever. It's fine. I'm not going to go the whole KG route, the whole Glenn Big Baby Davis route about getting so upset about this, being so pissed off about it. I'm not going to go that route. But what I am upset with Kyrie, it's just stop pouring fuel on this fire. It's just let it go. What happened to you? Everybody loved you when you were here, or I should say, a majority of everybody people of Celtics fans adored you as a Celtic. Everybody kissed your ass 24/7 that wanted you to stay with this team, even after you made some comments late in your last year here. So many people were still willing to put up with your BS. So I don't see why he's so pissed off about his situation with the Celtics. What did Danny Ainge, what did Brad Stevens, what happened that you just, in a flick of a wrist or a flick of a situation, you just turned on this team? You can make your comments about the fans, whatever. I mean, I still think those were out of bounds of what you said, but still, this franchise, the team, not the fan base, but the franchise, what did they do to you that irritated you, that pissed you off so much that you had to go do that? That's the part that bothers me. It's just stop being a child, Kyrie. Stop being an effing child. I don't want to hear your shit anymore. That I've had enough. Oh, it's so irritating listening to Kyrie at times. But he won. They're moving on. And the other situation was that moron that threw that water bottle at Kyrie. Now, I do not condone that at all. That guy is an idiot. He's a moron. He does not represent all of Celtics fans. I know there's been some pushback there from some people in the media, some of the national outlets that have taken it out of context. ESPN and your stupid tweet. that was, oh my God, that was so bad. They took that quote from Kevin Durant about the whole situation with the bottle, and they literally pieced it together to make that quote that made it out like Boston was a racist city. They didn't play the whole quote the way it was, because Kevin Durant was not making Boston racist. He was just saying that there was a stupid fan, basically, and they pieced it together. Of course they did. So that part was so irritating when it comes to this whole situation. It's just like, there are people that have stood up for him, not the bottle thrower, but that stood up for the good Celtics fans in this team. But of course, people are going to take things out of context. But when it comes to that idiot, that moron that threw that water bottle, it's just like, of course you had to do it. Everything was going smoothly. Everybody was being civil from the standpoint that they weren't saying anything racist. They weren't saying anything wrong. They were giving Kyrie everything they had in the most respectful jeers that you could, without adding any of the belligerence or racism that Kyrie had tried to throw out there as a smokescreen. Then you have this moron come out there and throw a water bottle at Kyrie, and it was just like, what are you doing, dude? I don't care what you think of Kyrie. I don't like Kyrie either, but as a human being, I respect him. And you don't do that. You don't throw water bottles. You don't dump popcorn on people. You don't spit on people. You don't act like a jackass out there when you go to a game. If you can't handle, if this was related to alcohol, which I don't know, I'm not saying it was, but if it was, the dude clearly couldn't handle his liquor. If he was drinking, because you can't do that. I know not everybody's going to be the same, and you can't have a perfect world, and I'm not asking for that. I'm not asking to ban liquor because I want to go to the game and I want to have a couple beers or a drink, whatever I want when I go to the game. I'll spend my $10 on one stupid beer at the game so that I can have one. But the fact of the matter is you don't act like that. You don't act like a jackass when you're out there. Be respectful. Be a human being. That's all we're asking. Just be a human being. And then maybe we can have a conversation. But if you're going to act like that, then just don't come. Just don't go. That's the whole situation, because everything was going fine for the Celtics and their fans, and then you had to give Kyrie more ammunition, and it was just so pathetic, just like how the Celtics went out in this season. So it was so disappointing the way this season ended, and this is probably the most I've gotten worked up about the Celtics in a long time, and it's not for a good reason. It was so disappointing in the way things had to go for the Celtics this year, and it was really not what I was hoping for. But I mean, it's so frustrating when you think about what happened with that fan. You just had to give him that one last piece of ammunition. You could have just let him stomp on the floor. Then it would have been about Kyrie being a little baby. But you had to go be a jackass and throw a water bottle at him. Oh man! And then he did the video of him today at a court. It's funny from a standpoint of just the way that he's acting. He's acting like a frat boy, to be honest, right? In that video that I saw earlier today. He just, oh my God! If you want some laughs, just listen to the video of him coming outside of the courthouse today. It was just hilarious. He just sounds like your classic frat boy. That it's not me, it was me, it was the wrong guy. And then he goes, of course, and there's a video with him and his friends, and they're just partying it up like a bunch of drunk frat boys. And it was hilarious, but at the same time, it's sad because this kid. Well, I can't call him a kid because he's 21 years old, but he's acting like a child. And it was so depressing. Just why did you have to go and do that? It was uncalled for. And now you put another stain on, an unneeded stain on the good fans of Boston. I'm not talking for everybody, but I'm talking for a majority, at least the good ones that I know, and the majority that you see on TV that aren't doing stupid crap. Those are the ones I'm sticking up for, not the assholes that are out there, like the guy that threw the water bottle. You just had to go and give him ammunition, and it's going to be an interesting offseason. I don't know if the Celtics are even going to be able to get players to come to this team. We'll see. It's going to be interesting. We'll get more into the offseason as things go along here, and as things start to solidify with the front office and their search for a coach. We'll definitely touch on that a lot here and then in the coming weeks. But the other tenant of the Boston Garden, the TD Garden, the Boston Bruins, as I mentioned earlier, it's night and day as far as things go. As was getting depressed and thinking about all this with the Celtics, getting angry, getting worked up, the Boston Bruins are getting me worked up in a completely different way. I am so excited. Things have gone really well for the Bruins in the first round. They won in 5 games against the Capitals. They came out like barn burners in game 1 against the Islanders, especially that first line. And that's been that's been the revelation here. Not that you don't expect that out of Bergeron, Pasternak, and Marchand. Obviously, they're called the perfection line for the reason, and they're arguably the best overall line in hockey for a reason. But still, why I call it a revelation is just for probably the first two and a half games against the Capitals, they just weren't putting in, or the output that you got from them just wasn't the same. And I'm not saying the effort level. I'm sure the effort level was still there. That line does not take a day off, does not take a second off. So that I'm not questioning that at all. Not at all. What I'm saying is that the stat sheet wasn't there. The goals, it wasn't what you're used to. And then all of a sudden, in probably about the second period of game 3, that line came alive for the Bruins. And ever since, it's been world beaters on that line. They've been what you would expect. And Pasternak took over game 1 of this Islanders series of round 2 against the Islanders. He scored a hat trick, and that last one that he scored, just dangling, deking his way through, and just the skills that he showed on that last goal, that encapsulated Pasternak as a goal scorer. Now, Pasternak obviously was a first round pick, so he was a high pick, but still, he wasn't like number 1 or even a top 5 pick where you're expecting so much out of him, like to be a franchise savior. But still, you like I said, you expect a lot out of those. But he's surpassed every expectation. He's only 20. Well, I believe he just turned 25. So he played pretty much this whole year until 24. He already has 200 goals. He's got 224 assists. So he's 424 points already, and he's still very young. So this guy he's already a superstar. He's still got room to grow, in my opinion. There's still more. The scary thing is there's still more. And it was just so fun to watch him in game 1, just toy with the Islanders. And that was really kind of what was missing probably in that first series against the not series, but the first meeting, the first 5 meetings with the Islanders. That line just didn't feel the same, didn't look the same. Now, obviously, it's regular season. It's not playoffs where everything gets ratcheted way up in expectations. But still, man, that first line, Pasternak is just played out of their mind. Marchand, just like he always does, but especially this year, I've seen it a lot more, has just come up with big goal after big goal. And my God, that third period on game 2 on Monday night, that first line came to play in that third period. They refused to let this Bruins team lose, at least at that point. Now, overtime was a different story, but everything this first line has put in has been gold since game 3 of that Capitals series. So that first line's back, and it's been some other concerns though through this Islanders series, especially they're still without Kevin Miller, so you have to rely on Luzon, who we'll touch on here in just a second, who made a boneheaded mistake in this in game 2 that cost them in overtime. But really, it's been injuries to Craig Smith that's kind of stopped or halted, at least for right now, some of the production from that second line. Now, obviously, Taylor Hall and Krejci are what drives that second line, but Craig Smith is always there. He's good with puck possession. He never sees a shot he doesn't like. He's a good complemental piece on that second line for Hall and Krejci. But with having to slide DeBrusk up there, and DeBrusk has always since he's come up had an up and down NHL career, and this year it's been a lost season for DeBrusk, and I don't know if DeBrusk is going to go down like that Andrew Benintendi route type of show a lot of promise early, but then really things fizzle out for him here where you might need to kind of move him in the offseason. But point being is that I don't really like him on that second line just because he's been way, way, way too inconsistent this year. Goal scoring way down. For a while, he was sitting on 2 goals going late into the year, so just things were not good. And I know, obviously, you can bring that up with Taylor Hall, but since he came to Boston, he's been the old Taylor Hall, that 2018 Hart Trophy winner. So things have been great for Hall, but DeBrusk just hasn't found it. And it's so things weren't. It wasn't the same since he had to take over for Craig Smith. So we'll hopefully we'll get some good news here on Craig Smith, maybe after a couple days off, and when they get back at it tomorrow night for Game 3 in Long Island. Maybe they'll be able to. Maybe he'll have enough days off where he'll be able to get back into this series. But still, it's been difficult. Now, really, other than the injuries, there hasn't been too much that you could complain about until that second period of Game 2. That was where the Islanders came out and just bullied the Bruins around. They held that puck so much in the Bruins' own zone. It was really difficult to sit there and watch because there would be periods where Carlo and some of those defensive players for the Bruins were just stuck out for 2 minutes, 2+ minutes, and you could tell they were getting gassed. And obviously some of those lower lines are the ones that are getting stuck out there in that second period against them. And you could just tell they are getting gassed. And then Carlo takes that cross-checking penalty in the second period, a questionable one at that. And that the Islanders scored on that power play. And at that point, that one cost the Bruins the lead as the Islanders took a 3-2 lead at the time. 3-1 lead at the time. And it looked as though that game might be slipping away from Boston because in the first period, for probably about the first 8 minutes of that period, Boston played really well. They came out with a lot of energy, feeding off the home crowd. But then it just seemed like the energy, they just weren't. It looked like they were a dead battery that wasn't holding a charge. It wasn't the same effort that you saw for the last the first game in that first 8 minutes. So last 3+ periods of hockey, then things just died quickly before they made the great comeback there in the third period. But that was kind of concerning because as you move through the series, as you know, I predicted 7. I was really tempted today before I came onto the podcast to change my prediction to Bruins in 5. Now, I would love it if that happens, but I just see the fight that exists in this Islanders team. They don't have a lot of superstars. They don't have guys that are going to make it to the Hall of Fame like the Bruins have, because that whole first line is Hall of Fame material. They're very close to it. And the way Pasta is trending, he's on that train. So, and Krejci and Hall, those guys, I'm not calling them Hall of Famers. Don't confuse that with that. But I'm just saying the talent that the Bruins have is a notch above what the Islanders have. Not saying the Islanders don't have talent, but they have guys that you probably, when things are said and done, I don't think you're going to have a borderline Hall of Fame. Well, you'll have guys that have made multiple All-Star teams that are good pieces, but I just don't see any of those Hall of Fame foundational cornerstone type of guys on that team for the Islanders. But they scare me from the standpoint of they're one of those lunch pail gritty teams that never gives up. They'll scrap away for everything. And those are the teams in the playoffs that really scare me the most because they don't know when enough is enough. They don't know when to say quit. And they don't know any better than to keep on fighting, to keep on scrapping, that, oh, we shouldn't be here. I'm not saying that the Islanders are anywhere like the Montreal Canadiens, who I didn't think had any business getting the playoffs, but hey, look what happened. They knocked off the at least in the Canadian division, they knocked off the number one seeded Toronto Maple Leafs. So Maple Leafs fans are crying in their maple syrup this morning. But the Islanders, just from that standpoint, they played the Bruins well in the regular season, and I know everything was kind of a different story after they traded for Taylor Hall, when Taylor Hall came in and gave them a spark, and the Bruins played very well down the stretch, and they only lost, I believe, 3 or 4 games before the season was out. So things really changed after Hall came in. But still, there's that part of my brain, in the back of my brain, that still says that there's a possibility that the Islanders could find some of that regular season magic. And like I said, I still think the Bruins take this in 7. I don't think the Islanders are going to have enough in the end. And I was worried about the goaltender, for the rookie goaltender for the Islanders, but of course, they did make the switch over to Varlamov. So of course, there's one thing that I fear, the Bruins end up torching him in game 1. Now, I don't know if there's an injury involved there with the rookie, but now that they had to make the move back to the veteran Varlamov, it's still, I feel a little bit better about that situation now, where the Bruins might be able to get some scoring going and maybe be able to turn some things around, from that standpoint now, or at least go back to what they had in game 1 and game 3. They look pretty good, even down the stretch after that second period was over, where they refound some of that momentum. But like I said, there's just a part of me that's just hard for me to get over what I saw in the regular season against this Islanders team. So we'll see if. We'll see if my fears can be put aside. If maybe I'm just overthinking this, and maybe the Bruins just end up running roughshod here in the next couple of games. But I just don't see that happening. They have to go to Nassau County Coliseum in Long Island, and that's one of the that fan base is raucous down there. Now, I wouldn't put them in the class of the Bruins fans, but still, that they have a really good fan base down there. It's going to be tough to play on the road in Nassau. If the Bruins can split these 2 games, I'll feel pretty good about it here when you come back to Boston. In at least if you can take game 5 before you have to go back on the road. So you're going to have to, obviously, if my prediction comes true and you play 7, you're going to have to steal one of these games on the road, and you're going to have to do it here in these 2 games in Nassau, because you don't want to go down 3-1. Even though I think the Bruins are more talented, you can't afford to go down to 3-1 against a team like the Islanders, who, like I said earlier, they don't know when to say quit. They have a lot of that scrap to them, in a la the 2013 Red Sox, who had good players. Obviously, they had a Hall of Famer in Ortiz, but in my opinion, it wasn't one of their better Red Sox teams. So that's kind of what I see kind of with the Islanders, that they have good players. They have a capable playoff team. They have a team that could make a run, but once you come up against some of those higher level talented teams like the Bruins, like Tampa, if they make it that far, it's going to be tough unless one of those teams shows you some cracks. So if Boston is going to win this series, you got to take one of these games down in Long Island, because you don't want to go down 3-1, having to force a lot of pressure on yourself to try to make it back in this series. You don't want to have to play elimination game after elimination game after elimination game, and that wears on you really, really quick. But I think they'll be able to take one of these games. If they take a game in Nassau, I'd be more inclined to say that they'll take the second game of these first 2 down in Long Island, just because I think tomorrow night there's going to be a lot of energy. That fan base is going to be going up from 12,000 to, I believe, 15,000. So you're going to have closer to a full capacity stadium. So that joint will be rocking. But I think when things are said and done, when the Bruins end up coming back to Boston early next week, whatever the date is. I'll have to take a look and see what the playoff schedule looks like. But once they end up coming back to Boston, I think this series will be tied at 2 apiece. It's been really fun, really fun. Oh my God, I was jumping up like I was 5. I was just like I was a little kid. I got so excited in that game. I almost thought I was going to lose my voice. I was going to have one here for this podcast between having a cold and yelling and screaming. So you're lucky that I still have one, to be honest. But it's probably one of the it's the most fun I've had with sports here in the last couple of years since we've had a down year with Boston. But I'm excited for this series. I'll trust me. After I have a few obligations tomorrow night, after I have those, I'm going to be skedaddling right home to catch as much as I can of that series of Game 3 tomorrow night. Now, to another team that's been pretty consistent, that's been rolling for most of the year, we'll take a look at the Red Sox here. As you mentioned off the top of the show in our Out of the Box segment, the Red Sox quasi-swept the Florida Marlins or the Miami Marlins. They were supposed to play a 3-game set. The Sunday game got rained out. That's going to be a makeup game June 10th. It was a mutual off day that they had. So instead of the Red Sox having an off day, they're going to have 14 games in a 14-day stretch, I believe. I'll have to take a look at the schedule there. But basically, they lost their off day, so they're playing. They're on a streak for a while. So they swept what they had of that series. Then they have a 4-game series here that they're currently playing against the Houston Astros. They lost the first 2 games. That first game, they absolutely got crushed. It was not fun to watch. And then the second game of the series was more competitive. Garrett Richards looked pretty good. He ended up, I'm not sure if he got hurt or why the velocity dropped from 95 to 91. There hasn't been anything out there that says he's gotten hurt. So supposedly everything's all right. So I'm not sure why the dip in velocity there. That was kind of startling as to why that happened. But he pitched pretty well, made it into the 6th inning. And then after he departed, the bullpen and the defense just let them down last night. It was tough to watch because they still had the game within control where they would have had plenty of time to come back, but that the bullpen and the defense, like I said, they just had a bad 7th inning, and it was tough to watch. Rafael Devers had an error. They walked 4 in the inning. It was bad. And that leads me to this point with this pitching staff, especially when it comes to Erod. Now, Erod started out the month of April going hot, flying pretty well. He was 5-0, had an ERA of 3.68, was, like I said, undefeated, was giving a chance for his team to win every time he went out. And then come May, they played a dirty trick on him and changed the calendar, and his ERA ballooned up to 5.63 at this point. He's now 5-4. He's been it's not the velocity, honestly, that worries me, that scares me when it comes to Erod, because that's still there. Velocity's still there. The stuff is still there. But instead of missing bats, he's getting knocked around. In that game against Houston, he gave up 11 hits. So it's not like he's walking guys. It's not like he's got bad command. It's not like his velocity's down. He's just getting knocked around, which is unsettling. Now, it's kind of ironic that he's getting knocked around against the Astros, but if it was just the Astros, you could make some assumptions that, the Astros cheating, blah, 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 blah. Now I'm just joking at this point that it's the Astros banging on trash cans. I'm not really being serious that they are, because MLB would come down on their ass really hard if that was the case. But I think it's more maybe he's tipping his pitches, which is something that he's been known to do in the past. And they had to fix that because that was happening in that 2018 World Series championship year that they had. He ended up tipping his pitches, and we found out that he was doing that in Toronto, and that was a big problem. But the way things have gone now, you have to think maybe he's tipping his pitches if his velocity is still there, if the pitches, if his movement, if that's all still there. That you would have to dig through the video and see if if there's something that's giving that away, because he's just too good of a pitcher to do this. Now, I'm not saying he's your ace, he's your number one, or he's like a true number one to me. I've always loved Erod. I always thought there was potential there. I never thought he was your true number one, your true ace. I always thought, though, that he was a really good number two. He was probably had the potential to be one of the better number twos in baseball. But he never at first it was his health. He never seemed to stay healthy. Now, last year is a completely different story. COVID and the myocarditis with his heart after the complications from COVID. I'm not going to include that. I'm talking about all the knee injuries, all the leg injuries that he's had, those type of injuries that he's come across in his career. Those are the ones that I'm saying that he's had issues with staying healthy. Now it just seems to be a fact that he's healthy now after coming off the dead arm, which basically he wasn't ready for the season. Now coming back, like I said, he went 5-0, had a good start to the season. Although I still didn't feel great about that 5-0, even though his ERA was in the middle 3.6s. It still didn't look like the old Erod. And now, like I said, you have to wonder if he's tipping pitches, if that's something that's leading to him getting knocked around, giving up 11 hits over this series with the Astros. That's just the concerning part, because right now you don't have Chris Sale back, and you don't know what you're going to have when you get him back. Nathan Eovaldi, their other quote-unquote ace that they have on the staff, just isn't pitching the same either. He came out of the gate strong, and now I know it's a long season. I get it. But these have been in some prolonged streaks. It's not like, he had a couple bad weeks. This is 4 or 5 starts plus for both of these guys. And then they both haven't pitched up to their standards. Because when both of them are healthy, they have great stuff. They're good pitchers. But neither one of them, since the calendar's turned to May, have been anything to write home about. And like I said, so it scares me here that you're having to rely on Nick Pivetta, Garrett Richards, and Perez. Yes, they've been great. Perez, way above expectations, although I'd like to see him get out of the 5th inning a few more times, or get to the 5th inning a few more times as well. Now, Garrett Richards, you all know my thoughts at the beginning of the year. I wasn't a big fan of Garrett Richards. I wanted Kluber. Now, that's kind of still unwritten there. I haven't been, other than the no-hitter, I still have my doubts whether he's going to stay healthy for the long run. And you can say that about Garrett Richards. And that was one of the reasons I wasn't a big Richards fan. He's got good stuff, but I just saw him get knocked around those first couple starts. But to be honest, and to his credit, he's worked on things. He's been accountable. And he's gone out there and pitched pretty well. But still, you're not talking about the 2015 Garrett Richards, that one that was the ace of the staff of those Angels teams. But still, you have a good pitcher in Richards, and then Pivetta, who hasn't lost since coming to Boston, in Martin Perez. So that's, if right now with the way that Eovaldi and Erod are pitching, especially with Erod, I just don't feel comfortable if you're having to rely on those 3 to carry you, because none of them have been workhorses on a staff. none of the, and I'm not calling on them to be aces. I'm just calling on them to be steady starters every day. So give me 5-6 innings, give up 2-3 runs a game, 4 maybe, because this offense is averaging a lot of runs. I believe they're at 6+ runs a game. So you have a good offense, but you don't want to get into that point where, okay, one of these guys out of those 3 that I mentioned with Richards, Martin Perez, or with Garrett Richards or Pivetta, you don't want to have to rely on if one of those goes down. Then okay, then that's basically you're left with two kind of scrap heap guys that you've turned into some good pitchers that you're having to rely on, with Eovaldi and Erod not pitching well, and then you're still waiting on Chris Sale to come back. Now, this is where when Tanner Houck gets back, that's where I'd like to see them maybe have him take over somebody's slot in the rotation. I still want to see him up at the big league level because I still think he has elite stuff. He's going to be in this rotation for a long time, in my opinion, because what he's got plays at the major league level. There's nothing fluky from what he has. So I'd like to see him come up here. But basically, my whole point with this whole situation is that Erod just has not looked the same. And if he can't give you a semblance of what we've seen, those flashes, or that whole season in 2019 that he put together from Erod, what we need from him until Chris Sale gets back, if him being your quasi ace, then this team might start to kind of hit the skids a little bit if he can't right the ship, just because I don't think you can rely heavily on those 3 at the bottom if anything goes south with Erod or Eovaldi. So if those 2 can kind of get things back on track, I'll feel better about the next couple months of this team, of how things are going to go. Because offensively, I'm not worried, even though the middle of this order right now with Martinez, Devers, and Bogaerts, none of them are really hitting their stride like they were the first 6 weeks of the season. But again, it's baseball, long way to go. Those guys have great track records, as they say. They have a good back of the baseball card. So it's nothing that I'm going to sit here and really worry about when it comes to this team. They'll find it. It would be nice if they showed up here because they're in a tough stretch. It was a bad time for them to kind of go cold against some of the better teams with the Astros, and then they'll have a 3-game set here against the Yankees for the first time this season. Man, it seems kind of weird saying June 4th is the first time you play New York with the Yankees. But still, you play the Astros in Houston, you go to New York, you come home, then you have to face the Astros at home. Then you have to face the Blue Jays. Then you have to face the Rays. So you're going through a really tough stretch here, and really until after the All-Star break, it's really, really tough. So you can't sit there and say there's any soft spot. And this really is going to be this next month to 2 months, really. This is going to be the grinder for the Red Sox, as far as we're going to see what they're made of here. If they really are true division contenders, playoff contenders, wild card contenders, you're going to see really what they're made of over this next couple of months, because this is where they play the top teams in the division. They play teams like Houston that are true World Series contenders, and obviously contenders for the playoffs in that right. So the Red Sox really have their tough part of the schedule. They really have things cut out for them as we move along here. Like I said, offensively, these guys are really good. This is one of the better offensive teams in baseball. I don't see this being a worry. For me, it's going to be this pitching staff, especially Erod, going down the stretch. If he can find things, if they get them back in order, and then you get Chris Sale back, I'll feel back on track to where this season started. But it's just lately things just haven't been the same. And and like I said, I still think they're going to make the playoffs. I still think they're going to get 90 plus wins. It's just this is that part of the season where we're in baseball where you hit that rocky patch, and it's like, how long is it going to last? Can you get out of it in short order? And if you can, then that's where you'll see the mental makeup this team has. And that's where those good Red Sox teams of the past, like 2018, they never had those 4-game, 5-game, 6-game, 7-game losing streaks. It was, all right, most will lose us 3 games in a row. They might have had a 1-4-gamer. That might have been it. But basically, they don't keep these losing streaks going a long time. They find ways to win these games and not go into these long slumps. And so far, that's what I've seen with the Red Sox. Now, playing these good teams, that's where you're really going to see it, if what they're made of, and if they can do that. And if they can, I really like the chances that they have. Now, like I said, moving forward, they have 3-game set against the Yankees in New York this weekend. So I'm really looking forward to that. Obviously, that's a no-brainer. I mean, Red Sox, Yankees, since I was a kid, has always been appointment viewing. Now, it's not the same as it was when I was growing up from the late 90s, early 2000s, that 2003 through 04, really to 07. That like 03 to 07 was where the tensions were the highest. Now, obviously, 03, 04, that was like somebody put the burner past high and everything was boiling over in that pot for those two teams. But I'm still, with how good both of the teams are, even New York has hit a skid here. They've really been on the wrong side of things here lately, getting swept by the Tigers and having to face the Rays. So they're not looking good here lately, but they're still one of the top teams in baseball. Like I said, long season. But it'll be interesting to see how things go against the Yankees. And like they said, they have to come home and play Houston. So by the time that we get with you next week, we'll have a lot to talk about when it comes to how the Red Sox fared in this last couple of games against the Astros, and then the weekend series against the Yankees, and another home set against those Stros. So it'll be interesting to see how things shake out there. See if how the Red Sox make out being tested by these two juggernauts of teams. Now, as far as the Patriots are concerned, not a lot of news was going on with the Patriots here. They had some OTAs that have started up here, and some of the players that were missing from those previous practices did show up, including Damian Harris. And all the quarterbacks were there last time, but then you ended up having both of the tight ends show up. You had most of the receiving core there. Basically, most of the team was there. There weren't any really high-profile ones that were missing this time around. So the OTAs went off pretty smoothly. Not much to talk about from that standpoint. They interviewed Hunter Henry, and he said that he really loves the culture here in New England, looking forward to the winning ways and being part of all that. Really not anything that you're writing home about there. I mean, what would you expect him to say after getting that massive contract from New England? I mean, you're getting paid by him, so why not say those type of things? And there's been no news on Julio at this point. I was hoping that we'd have a big Julio Jones story to break in with here during the podcast, either tonight or if it had happened earlier in the week. So the Julio watch will continue for you going into next week, and cross your fingers, folks. Maybe we'll have Julio news for you, and hopefully that it's news that he got traded to the New England Patriots. But we're still on Julio watch. Maybe we'll get a nice graphic for a Julio watch. I won't promise that, but we'll get that up and going. And over the weekend, I'm going to try to work on getting the actual social media up and running for the New England Sports Weekly podcast. We'll get a Twitter, get a Facebook going. Maybe we'll get an Instagram up there as well, so you can all post questions directly to there. So we'll keep an eye on everything Boston as we go forward. We'll keep you up to date on that Bruins playoff series. maybe we'll think about doing a live watch along. Who knows? Well, maybe I'll put that out on the social media and see what you guys think about that. But until next week, I've been Sean Metcalf, and all of you out there, enjoy the playoffs for the Bruins, and go Bees, go Seas, go Celtics and Pats. We'll see you next week.